There is general agreement that the world needs cleaner energy. But given our dependence on fossil fuels, it's not going to happen soon. A visiting expert has crunched the numbers and come up with a scenario that he says is practical, if not revolutionary. That's ambiguous. I mean, it's not revolutionary. Dr. Scott Tinker is both state geologist of Texas and director of the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas. He is in New Zealand as a guest of the Petroleum Exploration and Production Association, along with the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. Scott Tinker's made a documentary called Switch. The title, as well as the obvious reference to an electrical switch, also means the point at which the falling line on the graph, representing energy from fossil fuels, crosses the rising line representing the energy derived from alternatives. Transition. Dr. Tinker reckons in his documentary that crossover, that switch, could happen, in 50 years. 50 years, I said?
Transitions take a long time. And, they're limited by things like thermodynamics and kinetics and infrastructure and the economy. So cars last 20 years, power plants last 60 or 70 years.
What you say is that the main replacement for oil will be different sources of oil. What do you mean?
Well, we looked at compressed natural gas, we looked at biofuels, we looked at electric, and they're all going to be part of it. But in that transition period, affordability drives, and it looks like there's other sources of oil that are going to be equally affordable to those things, so they're going to be part of that. Dave Brooks wrote an op-ed in the New York Times this morning looking across America and all the increased production going on now of more sources of oil. So I'm not making a hope or a wishful forecast. We're looking at what we think will happen, and you can accelerate that, potentially.
This will make a lot of people very disheartened because, of course, if the replacement for oil is just different sources of oil, then what's going to happen to the climate change issue?
Sure. Yeah, sure. There's going to be more CO2 emissions.
I think that it's a gentleman called Richard Muller.
Rich Muller, yeah.
In a documentary who predicts that, look, we'll learn to live with global warming because we cannot afford to do anything else. Tease that out for me, because there are a lot of people who say we cannot learn to live with global warming.
Right.
It's a disastrous situation.
Right. Yeah, Rich is a very bright physicist from Berkeley, Cal Berkeley. He wrote a book called Energy for Future Presidents. Physics for Future Presidents was the first book. And he was looking at it sort of in an actual sense as well, not necessarily what he would want, but what people are doing in the world today. And so what they're developing, what they can afford in terms of energy. And I've been all over the world and seen countries that are developing their economies now, just starting to. How do we eat? How do we get a roof over our head, clothe our kids, and get educated? And they're using the most affordable fuels. And right now, those are fossil fuels like they were 100 years ago. So again, the forecast is not one of necessarily what we hope, but likely what is going to be. And now let's not be too desperate. There's a transition away from oil. It's been happening since 1979, a slow transition away from coal. More natural gas in the mix, more nuclear in the mix, and certainly more renewables in the mix.
Just tell me why natural gas is a favourite for you. Because to a lot of people it's just another form of fossil fuel, right?
It's a transition fuel. So wood and hay were all carbon. Coal, largely carbon. Oil is mostly carbon and some hydrogen, and natural gas has 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. So there's a lot more hydrogen in that mix.
And less carbon.
Less carbon. So when you combust it, still CO2 emissions, but less.
In energy terms, are there less carbon dioxide emissions?
Yes.
Per energy unit?
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah, about half of coal and oil. More than renewables, more than nuclear. But the particulate matter for local air emissions, the SOx and the NOx and the mercury, not there. So environmentally, natural gas is better. Not perfect. I'm not selling gas. I'm just saying it's here, it's affordable, available, reliable. There's a lot of it. So it's part of that transition.
There's a lot of it if we frack it.
There's a lot of it conventionally, even without fracking. For example, Russia and the Middle East, where they're pretty anti-frack because they have to as in all things energy, there's multiple layers. So Moscow actually is pretty anti-hydraulic fracturing, not so much because of the environment, because they have markets in Europe they got to deliver their conventional gas to. So they actually support anti-fracking stuff.
In case it undermines their market.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
And energy markets are huge globally. And you can dig deep and see that kind of thing. So a lot of conventional gas, and then there's a lot of unconventional gas, which does require hydraulic fracturing.
You do slide over the concern about fracking in your documentary.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, you seem to conclude that the pumping the water down is not a problem, that groundwater has never in the history of fracking been contaminated by the fracking process itself.
By the fracking process.
Is that true?
That's a pretty important qualifier.
Yes.
And yes. So the hydraulic fracturing, that's true in the United States and 1 million plus or minus wells. The hydraulic fracturing process happens down X thousands of feet or, thousands of meters actually below the surface and rubbleizes rock that's about 500 feet thick. So you don't crack the rock that's a mile or 2 miles above you to the surface, all the way to the surface.
But you would have seen, documentaries, you would have listened to the controversy, you would have seen people lighting the water that comes out of their taps. What's that all about?
That's shown over and over again, and you're referring to Josh's movie Gasland and others. That's natural gas was there, either naturally already, so they'd been lighting those sinks on fire for decades before fracking. And they've actually said that, some of those people now. Or let's leave the hydraulic fracturing process and just go to oil and gas operations. When you produce oil and gas out of a well bore, the groundwater is protected by a metal casing and cement. Works pretty well. Now and then it doesn't work. And so you can leak gas into the freshwater aquifer through that surface casing just through production. It doesn't matter whether it was fracked or not fracked. And that happens now and then, particularly in older wells. So you've seen some methane contaminating groundwater in old oil and gas areas, and that can get in your sink. So again, the whole operation is part of oil and gas, and you have to do it very well. It has to be regulated well. Those who don't honor their drilling permits or do it right, just like in any industry, should not be allowed to operate.
At this point, I have to ask you whether you are an apologist for the fossil fuel industry.
An apologist?
Yeah.
No,
Are you a paid advisor for the fossil fuel industry?
I'm on several boards, both fossil fuels and other energy.
But oil and gas companies specifically?
Yes, and others.
How does that affect the way you interpret the situation we are in?
Yeah, my feeling is it gives me knowledge. If I want to know something about the medical industry, I'd ask a doctor.
It depends on how you see the status quo, though, doesn't it? I mean, fascinating documentary.
Yeah.
But what the documentary is saying is, we, the world, has a lifestyle which we have and we want to keep, or a lifestyle to which we want to aspire to. In order to ensure that that happens, we need to carry on doing what we're doing. The alternative view is that the world has changed. The status quo does not function anymore. We all need to change. There's no way that everybody in India is going to have a car fueled by anything to do with fossil. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean conceptually.
Okay. But you're saying forget about it, that's idealism.
No, not at all. I'm looking at the way the world transitions between this balance between energy, the economy, and the environment. And those are real, I call that the waltz of the 3 E's, and I've spoken about that for over a decade. It's a subtle dance that goes on. You can see it. 6 of the last 7 global recessions were preceded by a spike in the price of energy.
Is that causation or correlation?
It's correlation. Causation is very difficult to prove in science. Right. Very difficult.
And also, people will say, well, it's the speculators for you, right?
Well, there's speculation in it, Kim, for sure.
So it's not a pure analysis.
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, economies are way more complicated than energy. But energy underpins, it's a part of an underpinning of a healthy economy. And so when you start to see expensive energy, and it spikes, so unpredicted and unexpected perhaps, economies react to that. When economies suffer, investment in the environment suffers. It happens over and over. There are just countless examples of that, including emissions and global warming.
Let's talk about coal. You went to this huge coal mine.
It's a big mine.
What is that? What do they call it?
It's it's part of the Powder River Basin. Yeah.
And this coal mine, the coal produced in this coal mine produces essentially half the electricity used in the United States.
Oh, no. Coal is half of the electricity in the United States, or was.
And this coal mine is half the half.
The whole area is half the half.
Okay.
And that mine is 5%.
All right. Anyway, it's big.
Yeah, it's big. It's a big open pit. What we filmed but didn't show for time was the reclamation that goes on there. So in that kind of open pit mining, they actually backfill, contour, reseed, restock, and the land that is mined is actually nicer with natives than the land they're going toward in that kind of an operation.
All right.
So the whole moves across the landscape. Different from mountaintop removal, which is permanently ugly.
Yeah.
Different from risky mining at depth, which now and then collapses, black lung and other kinds of things. So again, as with all things energy, different processes.
So you're saying
risks.
there are bad coal mines, but this happens to be a good one.
It's better. I mean, it's a big hole in the ground. Good or bad, it's a big hole in the ground.
But beyond that, that quantity of coal is filthy, right? And there is no efficient way of carbon sequestration.
There are...
affordably.
You got it. So technologically, it can be done today.
Yeah.
Getting closer to affordable, still very expensive because of the scale. There's over 20 billion tons a year that people put into the atmosphere globally. And that's a lot of CO2.
But you're not prepared to say, as many people do, coal is bad. Coal is bad. Leave it in the ground because we cannot afford to get it out without hugely increasing the risk of global warming.
So when I go to South Africa, and I chaired a World Bank panel just 2 weeks ago, and the minister from South Africa was there, and they use over 80% coal. And he said, we are just starting to lift our people out of poverty, literally. Electricity, food, shelter, education. We have to do that with affordable energy. I can't look at him and say, no, you can't. It's bad for the climate. That's a time scale challenge, and it's a global challenge. There are close to 3 billion people without much energy today out of the 7 billion on Earth. It's hard to look at them and say, you can't have access to affordable energy. So rather than that, we look at the energy mix, which changes around the world, and say, how can you make your mix improved for certain parameters that we all agree to? Affordable, available, reliable is good. Environmentally sustainable is a must. If you could make coal environmentally sustainable, get out the SOx, the NOx, the mercury, the particulates, and the CO2, and it could compete with solar. So they're the same. I'm fine with coal then. I'm not going to call it bad.
But we can't, because that would make it too expensive and useless.
It makes it very expensive in most places today. But again, technology could drive, and you could bring the cost down, as with other more expensive energy today. The costs are coming down as economies of scale kick in. And so that energy mix is a critical part of the conversation you and I are having right now, and it varies geopolitically. It's tough to make somebody bad because they're using what they have. New Zealand is blessed with terrific renewable resources.
Oh, to be Norway, however.
Well, but you are. In fact, you're more versatile. Add geothermal. Add good tides and waves, which they have. Add the ability to grow biofuels, which they don't have for transportation. Okay, you have a tremendous diverse renewable portfolio on top of the hydro.
You give biofuels quite a bad rap because, you point out that they need so much land and resources. And yes, you need to grow more cellulose-dense plants on more marginal land for ethanol, but they're low in energy, right?
Yeah, so we tried not to give anything a bad rap ourselves. One of the
by implication.
Well, the expert that we were speaking to at Cal Davis, Dan Sperling, spoke about the broad portfolio of transportation alternatives. And they look at all of them there. Electricity, CNG, biofuels. He said, well, it'll never replace oil. What he means by that is the scale of global demand for liquid fuels is so great you can't grow enough. But you can certainly grow some, and they make good economic sense in some regions. Brazil is a great example. The U.S., we grow more biofuels than Brazil. Most people don't know that.
But what sort of biofuels?
Well, it's corn ethanol.
So that's a lousy use of land and corn, isn't it?
And we didn't even mention corn ethanol in our film because it is a lousy use. You'll get me to say that's not a good one.
No.
But cellulosics, cane in Brazil, miscanthus, shrub oak, other kinds of where you use the whole plant on lands that aren't competing with food, makes some sense. It can be more expensive if you don't have the right rainfall of the soil and you need fertilizers and you have to move it far. Those are all negative things. Okay, so again, geographically, it varies. Some are equipped for that. If you are, you should do it. But you can't try to make Iceland become a biofuel state, right? They don't have the right climate to do that, whereas a country like Brazil or maybe in the northern part of New Zealand and other places.
You think that the market's going to get us through this, don't you?
I think the market's part of it. Yep, I do.
But where's the invisible hand in the market? In other words, if you rely on the market, then everybody's going to rush and do this, or everybody's going to rush and do that. Your documentary gives the impression that you want an intelligent balance, an intelligent mix, a mélange of best use of resources with minimum environmental impact. The market's not going to do that, is it?
I agree. And if you look at the mix that I show from 1980 to 2080, it changes dramatically. 100 years is a long time, but I'm a geologist. Okay, it's a short time. I mean, it's really not a long time for the kind of change we were showing in 100 years. I say the market's part of it. Why? People still, and I'm not advocating this, we still make choices based on cost for most energy things. We still do as a globe. So cost has to be part of that equation. The other triangle I think about a lot is the interaction between government, industry, and let's call it academia and NGOs. We have different time frames. Governments have an election cycle. Business have quarterly price cycles. We academics can think a little longer term. That combination of interests is the reason we made the film. Last night, here in Wellington, people were in the room that I've been told would not otherwise sit in a room together. And more than one person has said that to me. We had
you can get the entire population of New Zealand in it.
Well, it was only 200. But we had sustainability. We had oil and gas. We had educators. We had government officials. The energy minister was there. We were having an interestingly intelligent conversation. I wish it lasted longer. That has to happen so that we can begin to talk about the kinds of compromises you're describing, because nobody's right in this. Nobody's right. Everybody has some component of right, and you got to bring that to the middle so everybody's just a little uncomfortable, and that's called compromise, in order to move forward. Otherwise, you end up like the U.S. Congress. Stuck. Just sitting on their sides, lobbing things right now. It is temporarily broken. There's no compromise going on to move forward. And that means you're not going to get everything you want, but it is going to be positive progress. So I think governments have a role in that, Kim. I really do. I don't think it's the only role. I think you also have to consider the economic ramifications of energy and how people really make decisions about what they use.
I'm talking to Dr. Scott Tinker. He's the state geologist of Texas and director of the Bureau of Economic Geology there. You say, and this goes without saying, I guess, that future oil is going to be expensive.
Mm-hmm.
As the price increases, so will supply. In other words, there will be incentives to go to more difficult areas and get it out.
Yes.
Riskier areas, the risk will increase. You accept that, right?
Yep.
You say the alternatives need to be affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, make them so. Why can't we make them affordable? If you believe that global climate change is a real problem, the alternatives can be made affordable, because without that, we're doomed.
Yeah. So to make something affordable...
Yeah. Massive subsidies.
Okay.
Huge incentives.
Sure.
Why not?
I'm a fan of More a fan of incentives and subsidies, but we could look at both. Those both cost money.
Yes.
Somewhere somebody pays for that.
Yeah, but somebody's going to be paying for this ridiculously expensive oil that's,
Correct.
Several million miles under the Gulf of Mexico, right?
So what you're asking is, should everyone pay equally in some sort of a government compensation scheme, whether it's taxes or whatever goes on, business? But that's how everyone pays for incentives and subsidies.
Right.
Everyone pays.
Okay.
Some people worry that that may be regressive.
Why?
Depending on how you implement that, the cost could be the same to each individual, let's say at a gasoline pump. And in fact, I may make a small living and I'm paying the same amount for gasoline as somebody who makes a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So that's a regressive tax. If I maybe at the kilowatt hour at my home, we all pay the same cost. But in fact, some people have giant homes, some people have small homes. They're paying more because they use more, but the cost per unit is the same. So the point of making something affordable is partly how you do it and who pays, but it's partly technology. And so here's the challenge. I've got a very dense form of energy in a liquid gasoline or a uranium pellet in a nuclear fuel rod. It's very dense. Okay? That means I get a lot of bang for the buck, a little bit. To take something that's not dense, solar, wind, something we grow, and make it dense is not efficient. It takes a lot to do that. That means it costs more. So there's a true thermodynamic, heat conversion, kinetic motion conversion changes that have to go on to make those affordable.
Yeah. But your triangle, sorry.
That's
I don't mean to remember, but your triangle, right, you've got your economy and the environment and you've got the energy.
Yeah.
If you factor in environmental costs,
yes,
then doesn't that alter your paradigm? You're
does.
not factoring in the environmental costs.
Well, it depends on the environmentalists that you talk with.
I'm talking about global warming because that's underwriting this conversation.
For some. But
Why not you?
Well, let me just talk about environmentalists that are all passionate. Some are very passionate about the atmosphere and global warming. Others that I know, in fact, on our website is a guy named Jesse Osabel, a very strong environmentalist. He's passionate about land use. He wants no new infrastructure. Smaller is better to him. We only have so much land. Why cover it with panels and turbines? I have another environmentalist friend in Texas who's passionate about water. Atmosphere is important, land's important, water's important for the environment. Lower water use, less cooling, less drilling fluids, etc. So environment, we've managed pretty well our solid wastes. We've managed pretty well our liquid waste. We haven't managed our gaseous waste yet. I completely agree with you. Let's start managing our emissions. Whether you are a global warming passionate person or less so, we should manage our emissions. I'm 100% aligned with that. But we do have to recognize that there's kind of the land, air, and sea, the solid, liquid, gaseous components of all the environment. And sometimes they're in conflict.
Are you saying that the environmental issues are so myriad and complicated that you can't factor them all in?
You can factor them in, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't pick one over another necessarily. Atmospheric is one component.
Is it? Global warming
is a big component, but not the only component.
It's not the major component?
I said it's a big one, but it's not the only one.
I mean, you accept, presumably.
Oh, sure.
Anthropogenic.
Absolutely.
Global warming, okay.
We're contributing to warming. There's no doubt about that, to me, scientifically today, that we're contributing to global warming. I go back and look at the people who say, I need cheap energy in order to live today. 30 years out is important to me. Today is more important to me because I can't educate my kids. And this is the world we live in. And so I wish we could sit here and solve this together. And if I could, it's not simple.
Tell me this as a sidebar. Mm-hmm. The people that you mix with in the oil industry and the gas industry and the coal industry.
Well, and the renewables and the nuclear.
No. I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the people in the fossil fuel industry.
Sure.
Is there a complete acceptance now that fossil fuels are contributing to global warming?
No.
Some of them are still denying it, or some of them say it's nothing to worry about. What?
Some of them, and not just the fossil fuel industry. Some people would say that it is a small component, if any. I'm not saying me. A small component, if any, and because of the way the world is developing its energy future, we simply can't mitigate it. When you build a 60-year coal plant every week in China, every week a new gigawatt power plant is built in China that runs on coal, and India is following, they say, look, it's just too much to mitigate. We have to invest in adapting to. Okay? That's really, if you're going to take an end member of that, it'd be full mitigation, full adaptation. And most people are somewhere in between. Some more adapt, some more mitigate. Yeah.
So what do you say to the other side? What do you say to the people who say, look, you've got the train coming down the track and you're worried about, your lawn? It's an imbalance of concerns. You can't fuss about the economy when global warming is such a severe threat.
Mm-hmm. What do I say to them?
Yeah.
I think it's a balance, Kim. I mean, I think if I go back to, let's go to Copenhagen, December of 2009, I think it was, that meeting, which by all accounts accomplished nothing. Why? Most economies left saying, we're in a recession, global. They said, we can't afford this. We can't afford to mitigate atmospheric emissions, so we're going to spin it and say all sorts of things about why. But the real bottom line to me was they didn't have the capacity to invest in it. So I would say to someone who says this is the only challenge that we face in the world as, well, there are more. There's a lot more, and we've talked about quite a few of them now.
Are you open to the suggestion, however, that your blueprint, your balance, is effectively a green light for the predominant economy, which is the fossil fuel industry, the predominant source of energy, to go full speed ahead? Because there's plenty of time, there's no pressure, think about the economy, don't, worry about the important things.
It's not a blueprint.
Well, I use the word, the suggestion.
So I want to be real clear on what that is. It's perhaps a call to action. So what that describes is what I think will happen. Not that I hope...
Not should happen.
Should,
but
not
will
should.
Happen.
Not
no, I
hope
understand.
For. Yeah. And so if that is to come closer, if that transition is to come closer, some combination of technological advances, for example, energy storage, that would change the world.
Because solar and wind would then be able to be...
Scalable.
Non-intermittent.
You could scale them. You could keep the energy when it's generated, the sun's out, the wind's blowing, and use it when you need it. You mitigate the peaks and troughs. That changes the world. So it's a call to action for technology. Invest in that. Young people, governments, invest in that.
But then, of course, back to your triangle, in order for that investment in technology, you need thriving economies.
You do.
And in order to have thriving economies, you can't mess too much with the status quo. You have to let cheap coal continue to be used. But
it will be.
But if you let cheap coal continue to be used, you reduce the urgency to explore the alternatives. Surely.
Perhaps. I mean, do you know what you pay per kilowatt hour here in New Zealand for electricity?
I mean, I can't tell you
offhand. I think
it's
23 to 28 cents. 7 to 9 cents in the U.S.
I mean, I know we pay too much.
But
that's the constant complaint.
Maybe, but it affords you extremely clean, renewable energy.
So we are already paying the price.
You are, locally. You don't have the natural gas power plants, the coal power plants, certainly nuclear power plants. You have one coal, one...
Are you also arguing for the United States to pay more for its energy? If not, why not?
Yeah, so the loop we're having is I'm not sure that governments are very good at picking winners or driving markets. I think they've failed miserably, actually, in that. I think governments can invest...
You've heard about solid energy, then?
Well, and other examples.
Well,
No, but look, why does that matter to me? If I invest as a government in energy storage, okay, I'm investing in some industries and human thought and technology. Sure, I'm picking kind of a winner there, but I'm not picking an energy winner. I'm saying that will matter across the palette, won't it? And so that's something that's critical. Environmental sustainability is critical. Affordability and reliability is critical. Governments could look at the tenets of secure energy and say, we'd like to invest in things that make this happen. And then energy mixes compete for that. If you're coal and you're available, affordable, reliable, but you're just dirty, you're not competing. You have to do the things to begin to get into the competitive, secure space, which are going to cost more. So I'm not throwing coal out, I'm saying compete and become more environmentally sustainable. And as that happens, they're going to be then on a price competitive structure. If I'm solar and I want to be available and reliable, I'm not today because there's things called night and clouds because we use it in real time. So they need to invest in energy storage to become available and reliable. So does wind. Governments can help set the parameters for these things and let the mix compete. And the neat part about that is, if I'm in a country that has a lot of geothermal, like Iceland does, but not much anything else, hydro, it doesn't tell me I can or can't do that. If I'm in a country like China that has a lot of coal, it doesn't say you can't do that. It says here are the parameters across which you need to perform. And your coal price is going to get more expensive as a result of that. It starts to look at it in, I think, a way, and I don't have an answer here. The older I get, the less I know,
Isn't
but
that funny?
It is. I'm 53 and I feel like I'm... But it does start to let economies say, hey, here's the mix we have. How do we make it behave in a globally palatable way? We're not bad for having coal, but we need to do something with it. We're not bad for having oil. Let's go to the Middle East. They burn oil to make electricity. They burn natural gas to desalinate their water so they can have something to drink. There's no fresh water. So is the Middle East bad for burning oil and natural gas for everything? No, they're not. I've been there many, many times.
I'm talking to Dr. Scott Tinker. Couple of quick questions. Yeah. Oil sands, which is another source of oil, this has reminded me of this, you need natural gas generators as a rule to heat the sands to extract the oil. Is it energy efficient at the end of the day?
You need heat to boil water to make steam to extract the oil, whether that comes from natural gas or nuclear or solar, or wind. Yes, the net energy equation for oil sands is not great.
All right. So why are you doing it?
Because of liquid demand.
What?
Liquids demand. Look at transportation in New Zealand. And I've walked around a bunch. You have a lot of cars here.
So what, you're converting one form of energy into a more useful other.
For transportation.
Right.
Transportation challenge, Kim, is that it's mostly liquids. That's the densest form that we can put in vehicles.
Yeah.
So we need those liquids. We're converting coal liquids. We're converting natural gas to liquids. We're compressing it. We're converting oil sands to liquids by burning methane and boiling water and making steam. We need those liquids in transportation. That's why it's a tougher change in the electric markets where there are more choices. It's kind of limited right now.
Everybody's talking about the electric car, and you drive an electric golf cart.
Yeah, I do.
40 but if you could afford it, you'd buy a Tesla. Okay. Where's all that electricity going to come from?
Well, today, globally, and this means nothing, it's a global mix, it's almost 50% coal.
And so?
20% methane.
And so there's no escape, right?
It's a little...
Will there ever be a decoupling of the electric car from the fossil fuels?
Yes.
How?
It's happening. Coal's coming down, methane's going up. Again, remember, environmentally better. In the global mix, coal's plateauing, coming down, methane or natural gas is coming up. And nuclear is rising as well. Now, I know we don't talk nuclear much in New Zealand, but the world does.
And you're in favour of it?
It has to happen. You rarely
it
get
has to happen because it's the only way of producing carbon-free energy.
It's zero emissions. Now, it has waste. It's hugely dense. It's extremely efficient. And the scale is unmatched. That's why China's building 26 new reactors today. And India's going to follow. Probably thorium, not uranium. So,
thorium's, what's your view of thorium?
I like it.
I like it.
It makes more sense than uranium.
Because?
Because it's more efficient, there's less wastes.
What's the downside of thorium? Why aren't we all using thorium?
We should be.
Well, why not?
Why historically?
Yeah.
We wanted a plutonium byproduct for weapons.
So how are you going to persuade countries that will eventually like to keep their options open on the weapons front to use thorium?
Tough. You're in politics now.
All right.
But that's why India's looking at it. It makes a great sense. So, look, uranium, thorium, nuclear energy is a growing part of the global mix. It's not the only thing. But that's how you could charge those batteries efficiently, affordably, with zero emissions. So this is an interesting...
As we say in New Zealand, that you've got to swallow a lot of dead rats in order to get to a solution.
You don't need it in New Zealand.
We can't afford it in New Zealand.
And you don't need it. You have other great options. Not everybody does. Okay? This is such an important conversation. Not everybody has the same options you have.
But the thing is, we're not, contrary to appearances, we're not an island. We are part of the world.
You are.
And if China continues to build, coal...
It's one atmosphere.
So we all need, at some point, to have some kind of deal going.
We do. And here's what I say to students, and we've been screening all over the world. We'll have screened at 300 universities by the end of April. I say to students, you cannot like hydraulic fracking. That's fine. That means you probably like nuclear. And they kind of step back. We don't like nuclear, Scott. Nukes. I said, well, then you must really like coal. No, we don't like coal either. I said, well, do you like electricity? They're talking on their cell phones and blah, 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 plugging everything they have into a wall. We like renewables. I said, good. So do I. And they're starting to scale. We've got to solve the energy storage challenge. And not everybody has access to them. If you don't like frack, you don't like nuke, you like coal, you can't not like everything. By definition, by not liking something more, you're liking the other things. Germany has this problem right now. Angela Merkel's dealing with moratorium on fracking, post-Fukushima moratorium on nukes. You know what's happening in Germany today?
Snow.
They're burning more lignite. The last 4 years, more coal. CO2 emissions are going up in a country that is as green thinking as any country. They can't not like everything.
Otherwise, you get unintended consequences.
You do. You got to pick the things that you're going to compromise on and then make them good.
All right. So at the end of your documentary, you say, it's all of us can do something. Yeah. Really? Yes. I mean, I'm feeling, like I have gone from, denial to despair in one step.
That's not my intention.
No. What can one do? Turn off a light? Come on.
I used to think that, and I don't know what you really think. I used to think that 5 years ago when we started filming, that my actions were one of 7 billion. In the U.S., we didn't used to recycle. We recycle now. We had a cultural change over 2 decades. I can't go with a plastic bottle. I can't throw it away. I look and look and look for a recycle bin. That's a cultural change since I was a kid, for sure. That can happen in energy. So, yes, I turn off a light. I've had people come up to me later after seeing the film, I hate you. Join a long list. Because I can't leave a room without turning off the light now. I said, good. Good. Because that translates to your business, your workplace, your industry, your kids up and down. It translates to the way we think about energy. And we start to appreciate it for what it is, which isn't a right. It's a commodity, and it has consequences to the rest of the world.
Just let me ask you about that recycling thing. I mean, that's all very nice, and we recycle here as well. But isn't that a bit like, you know, the guy following the elephant with the shovel? If we didn't use so much plastic, we wouldn't need to attend to so much recycling. You know, take the step back.
Agree.
And we're back to the fossil fuel industry, right?
Plastics. Yeah, that's fossil fuels.
So.
Agree. So we use glasses to pour water in instead of plastic bottles.
Yes.
Agree.
Well, we'll do that then. But anything else I should do?
Well, in energy, you mean?
Yeah.
It translates across the board. You know,
I tell you what we could all do, and this gets back to your dreadful, dreadful triangle. We should all stop eating and consuming and buying and flying so much. How did you get here? And that would reduce our energy use hugely, but it would also affect the economy. So you're back to the intransigent, inexorable linkage of those two, right?
They're linked, but I agree with you on food. And I come from a country that is severely obese. We did a bit, it wasn't in the film. We actually rolled out a carton full of groceries, a basket from a store, and then the next scene you see 22 gallons of gasoline in that same carton, these red cans. That's what it took to fertilize, grow, harvest, transport, refine, package, market, sell, and transport and refrigerate in my own home. That much energy for one basket of groceries.
But the thing is that that's how the American economy works. The American economy works on having more than you need. That's what the consumer economy is about. Now, if you're going to say, okay, everyone, in order to get energy efficient, we are actually going to reduce our demand considerably, your economy is going to go even buster than it is already.
Maybe not. I think cultural changes can happen without economies going through disaster. I don't think they adapt very well quickly.
But do you think that's part of the transition?
Yes.
Reducing our demands
Yes.
across the board?
Yes, I do. I do. And per capita in developed nations, that's already happening. Not as steeply as it should, but developed nations' per capita energy use is coming down.
But then you've got this terrifying statistic about India.
Oh.
In the next 20 or 30 years, the demands of those currently without electricity, 600 million, will have to be met, and that's the equivalent of twice the population of the United States.
And you can double it when you add China.
So, me turning off the light is just not going to cut it.
Well, I don't mean to make you sad, but I think that translates. I do. I think that those kinds of things translate. Behavioral changes are cultural, and we have to think about energy differently this century than we did last century.
Dr. Scott Tinker, State Geologist of Texas and Director of the Bureau of Economic Geology there.